The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had never been so quiet. Representatives from 300 different worlds sat in their seats, but nobody spoke. The silence was heavy and frightening. Even the usual whispers and small conversations had stopped completely. Council leader Velthor stood on the central platform. His blue skin had turned pale, and his forearms shook slightly as he held the datapad. He had lived for over 200 years and had seen many terrible things: wars that destroyed entire star systems, plagues that killed billions, natural disasters that wiped out whole civilizations. But nothing had ever scared him like the report he was about to read. Fellow members of the council, Velthor began, his voice barely above a whisper. I have received confirmation from our deep space monitoring stations. The reports are true. The Korthok have been found. A wave of fear swept through the hall. Some representatives gasped. Others began praying to their various gods. A few simply fainted and fell from their seats. The name Korthok was known throughout the galaxy, but most species hoped it was just a legend, a scary story told to keep children from wandering too far from home. But it was not a legend. The Korthok were real, and they were the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever known. They came from a world so terrible that other Deathworlds looked like peaceful gardens in comparison. Korthok Prime was a planet where everything tried to kill everything else. The gravity was 3 times stronger than most worlds. The air was filled with poisonous gases. The ground shook constantly from earthquakes. Volcanoes erupted daily. Storms with winds that could tear apart mountains happened every few hours. Yet somehow, the Korthok had not just survived on this impossible world. They had become its masters. They stood 3 meters tall, with thick armor plating that grew naturally from their skin. Their bones were harder than steel. Their muscles were so strong they could crush starship hulls with their bare hands. They could heal from wounds that would kill any other species. They could live for weeks without food or water. They could breathe in atmospheres that were pure poison to everyone else. And they were always angry. For the past 1,000 years, the Korthok had been moving through the outer edges of the galaxy. Every world they visited became a dead world. They did not take prisoners. They did not make deals. They did not even try to communicate. They simply arrived, destroyed everything, and moved on to the next target. Velthor activated the holographic display in the center of the hall. Images appeared, showing the latest reports from the outer rim. Dead worlds floated in space like broken toys. Once great cities were now piles of rubble. Entire civilizations had been wiped out so completely that nothing remained except empty planets and silence. The Korthok fleet is moving inward, Velthor continued. Our best calculations show they will reach the inhabited sectors within 6 months. All defensive fleets are being recalled to protect the core worlds. All civilian populations in the outer territories have been ordered to evacuate immediately. Far away from the council chambers, Captain Lee Min-ho was having a very different kind of day. He stood on the bridge of his exploration ship, the New Soul, watching the stars drift by through the main view screen. His ship was on routine patrol duty in the frontier sectors, far from the politics and fear of the inner worlds. Lee was a tall man with kind eyes and calloused hands. He had spent most of his adult life in space, exploring new worlds and mapping unknown star systems. He loved his job because it meant he could always see something new. Today had been quiet, with nothing more exciting than cataloging a new asteroid field. His crew was small but experienced. Chief Engineer Park Yuna kept the ship running perfectly even when they were millions of miles from the nearest repair station. She was a genius with machines and could fix almost anything with spare parts and determination. Tactical Officer Kim Ji-won handled all the ship's weapons and defenses, though they rarely needed them. Medical Officer Choi Dong-yoon took care of everyone's health and also served as the ship's counselor when crew members felt homesick. They were all good people, and Lee was proud to serve with them. Captain, Kim Gi-won called from her station. I'm receiving an emergency transmission from Earth Command. Priority Alpha classification. Lee frowned. Priority Alpha meant something very serious was happening. In his 15 years of service, he had only received 3 Priority Alpha messages, and all of them had been about major disasters or wars. Put it through to my ready room, Lee said, and call the senior staff for a meeting in 10 minutes. Lee walked to his small office behind the bridge and activated the secure communication system. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to Ambassador Han Soman, Earth's representative to the Galactic Council. She looked tired and worried, which was unusual for her. Han was normally calm and confident, even during difficult negotiations. Captain Lee, Han said without any greeting, I need your ship to return to human space immediately. Drop whatever you're doing and head for the nearest major colony world. What's the situation, Ambassador? Lee asked. Han was quiet for a moment, as if she was trying to decide how much to tell him. The Korthok have been found. Captain, they're real, and they're moving toward human territory. Lee felt his blood turn cold. Like everyone else in the galaxy, he had heard stories about the Korthok. Most people thought they were just legends, but the look on Han's face told him otherwise. How long do we have? we asked. Maybe 6 months before they reach our outer colonies, Han replied. The council is in complete panic. Most species are pulling back to their core worlds and hoping the Korthok will ignore them. We're on our own. Lee nodded slowly. Humans had always been on their own in the galaxy. Most other species saw them as newcomers who had not earned their place among the stars. Some even thought humans were too primitive to deserve full membership in the galactic community. Understood, Ambassador. We'll head home immediately. There's something else, Captain, Han said. Long-range sensors have detected a massive fleet moving through the Kepler sector. The readings match Korthok ship designs. They're not just coming toward human space, they're almost here. Before Lee could respond, the communication system started, beeping with incoming alerts. Kim Juwan's voice came through the intercom system, and she sounded scared. Captain, you need to get back to the bridge right now. We have multiple contacts on long-range sensors. The computer is having trouble identifying them, but the energy signatures are unlike anything in our database. Lee ran back to the bridge, where his crew was staring at the main display in shock. Dozens of red dots were moving across the star map, heading directly toward human territory. The ships were huge, much larger than anything humans had ever built. Distance and speed, Lee asked. They're still 3 days away at current velocity, Kim reported. But Captain, these ships are massive. The largest ones are over 5 kilometers long. Park Yuna looked up from her engineering station. I'm reading power levels that shouldn't be possible. These ships are generating more energy than some small stars. Choi Dong-yoon was reviewing the medical database. Captain, if these really are Korthok ships, then we're looking at the most dangerous species in the galaxy. According to the files, they've never been defeated in battle. They've never retreated. They've never even been slowed down. Lee stared at the display, watching the red dots move closer to human space. In all his years of exploring the galaxy, he had never felt so small and helpless. These were not just ships approaching. They were the end of everything humans had built among the stars. But then he noticed something strange about the fleet's movement pattern. The ships were staying in formation, moving at a steady pace rather than rushing forward. For a species known for their overwhelming attacks, the Korthok seemed to be taking their time. Kim, are they broadcasting anything? Lee asked. That's the strange part, Captain. They're transmitting on multiple frequencies, but it's not like their usual attack patterns. It almost looks like they're trying to establish communication. Lee felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this would not end the way everyone expected. The galaxy was about to change forever, and humanity was right in the middle of it. The human colony world of New Busan was not a beautiful place. The planet had been chosen for settlement because it was close to important trade routes, not because anyone wanted to live there. The gravity was heavy, making every step feel like carrying an extra person on your back. The weather changed without warning, bringing storms that could knock down buildings. The ground shook regularly from earthquakes. That would terrify people on easier worlds. But humans had made it home anyway. Jung Hyok stood in the Planetary Defense Center, watching the displays that showed enemy ships approaching his world. He was a short, tough man who had spent his entire career defending difficult places from dangerous enemies. New Busan was supposed to be his easy assignment before retirement. A quiet colony world where nothing important ever happened. That was before the Korthok fleet appeared on his sensors. Sir, we're receiving evacuation orders from Earth Command, reported Lieutenant Kong Minsu from the communications station. All civilian populations are to be moved to the inner system immediately. Jung looked at the tactical display. 37 massive alien ships were heading straight for New Busan, according to every report he had ever read. Those ships carried the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy. Creatures that could tear apart starships with their bare hands. Beings that had never lost a battle and never shown mercy to anyone. But something was wrong with the picture. Lieutenant, what's the enemy fleet's attack formation? Jung asked. Kong studied his instruments for a moment. That's the strange part. Sir, they're not in attack formation. They're maintaining a standard approach pattern, almost like they're coming for a diplomatic visit. Jung frowned. The Korthok did not make diplomatic visits. They made crater-filled graveyards where cities used to be. Are they broadcasting anything? Yes, sir. That's another strange thing. They're transmitting on the standard first contact frequency. The universal translator is having some trouble with their language, but it seems like they're requesting permission to establish communication. Jung had been a soldier for 30 years. He had fought pirates, rebels, and alien raiders. He had defended colonies against natural disasters and hostile wildlife. But he had never seen anything like this. The most feared species in the galaxy was asking for permission to talk. Get me a direct line to the fleet commander, Jung ordered, and prepare the civilian evacuation ships, just in case this goes badly. Far above New Busan, the Korthok flagship moved through space like a floating mountain. The ship was 5 kilometers long and covered in armor plating that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of black metal. Weapons that could destroy planets were mounted along its sides. shield generators powerful enough to stop asteroid impacts hummed with barely contained energy. On the bridge of this massive warship, War Chief Grokster stood before the main display screen. He was 3 meters tall, with thick gray skin that looked like natural armor. His forearms ended in hands that could crush steel. His eyes glowed with a red light that made most beings afraid to look directly at him. Scars covered his body, each one a story of survival against impossible odds. But today, the most feared warrior in the galaxy was nervous. Grokster stared at the data files about the planet below. New Busan was listed as a human colony world, established by beings from a planet called Earth. As he read the information about Earth, Grokster felt something he had not experienced in many years. Amazement. Earth was a death world that made even Korthok warriors pause in respect. The planet had gravity that was twice as strong as most civilized worlds. The weather systems were violent and unpredictable, creating storms that could level entire cities. The ground moved constantly from something called plate tectonics, causing earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. The oceans were filled with creatures that hunted and killed for sport. The land was covered with plants and animals that would be considered deadly predators on most worlds. Yet somehow, the humans had not just survived on this impossible planet. They had become its dominant species. War Chief, said Throgak, approaching with careful steps. Even among the Korthok, Grokster was known for his unpredictable temper. The humans are responding to our communication request. Grokster turned his attention back to the present situation. What did they say? They want to establish direct contact with our fleet commander. They're asking about our intentions. This was the moment that would define everything. For 1,000 years, the Korthok had communicated with other species through violence. They had never needed words when actions spoke so much clearer. But these humans were different. They came from a world that understood the same harsh truths that had shaped the Korthok. Open a channel, Grokster commanded. The main screen flickered and showed the face of a human male. Colonel Jung Hyok looked small and fragile compared to the massive alien warrior, but his eyes showed no fear. He stared directly at Grokster as if he was looking at an equal rather than a monster from the galaxy's worst nightmares. I am Colonel Jung Hyok, Defense Coordinator for New Busan, the human said calmly. You are in human space without permission. State your intentions. Grokster was impressed, despite himself. Most species begged for mercy when they first saw a Korthok warrior. This human was making demands. I am War Chief Grokster of the Korthok Empire. Grokster replied, we have come to meet the species that claims to come from the death called Earth. Jung's expression did not change, but Grokster could see the human processing this information. What do you want with us? We want to understand how you survived, Grokster said simply. Meanwhile, Captain Lee Minho's ship was racing toward New Busan at maximum speed. The new Seoul's engines were running at dangerous levels, but Chief Engineer Park Yuna had assured him they could maintain this pace for a few more hours. Captain, we're receiving transmissions from the Korthok fleet, reported Kim Gi-on. They're actually talking to the colony's defense forces. Lee felt his world shift slightly. The Korthok were talking instead of fighting. This had never happened before in recorded galactic history. What are they saying? The universal translator is still working on their language, but it sounds like they're asking questions about Earth. They want to know about our homeworld's environment and how we adapted to survive there. Dr. Shin Menji looked up from her science station. She had been studying the Korthok fleet's energy signatures and biological readings from their ships. Captain, I'm detecting something unusual in the aliens' vital signs. What kind of unusual? Their stress indicators are elevated, but not in the way you'd expect from warriors preparing for battle. If I didn't know better, I'd say they're excited about something, maybe even nervous. We tried to understand what he was hearing. The most dangerous species in the galaxy was nervous about meeting humans. It made no sense, according to everything they knew about the Korthok. Kim, can we monitor the communication between the Korthok and New Busan? Already on it, Captain. Patching you through now. The bridge speakers crackled to life with the ongoing conversation between Colonel Jung and War Chief Grokster. Lee listened in amazement as the two military commanders discussed Earth's natural disasters, dangerous wildlife, and extreme weather conditions. But they were not talking about these things as problems to be avoided. They were talking about them as challenges that made a species stronger. Your people chose to climb mountains that could kill them, Grokster was saying. They chose to explore oceans filled with predators. They chose to build cities in places where the ground shakes and fire falls from the sky. Why? Because that's how we became who we are, Jung replied. Easy worlds make weak people. Hard worlds make strong people. Earth made us strong. There was a long pause in the conversation. When Grokster spoke again, his voice carried a tone that Lee had never heard from any alien species. Respect. We understand this truth, the Korthok leader said. Our world taught us the same lesson. Perhaps we are not so different. Lee looked around his bridge at his crew. They were all staring at the speakers in shock. The conversation they were hearing should have been impossible. The Korthok did not find common ground with other species. They destroyed other species. But humans, it seemed, were different. "Captain," Kim said quietly, "I think we're about to witness something that's never happened before in galactic history." "What's that?" "The Korthok are about to make their first ally." The transmission continued, with both leaders sharing stories of survival against impossible odds. As Lee listened, he began to understand that this was not a conquest fleet approaching human space. It was something much more significant, that it was the beginning of a partnership between the two most dangerous species the galaxy had ever known, and the rest of the galaxy was going to be very surprised. The meeting was set to take place on Mining Station Beta 7, a small facility built into an asteroid floating between human and Korthok territories. The station had been chosen because it was neutral ground, far from any major population centers. If things went wrong, the damage would be limited to a few dozen miners and workers. Captain Lee Minho stood in the station's main docking bay, watching the massive Korthok shuttle approach. The alien craft was 3 times larger than any human transport, built from black metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Weapons systems were visible along its hull, each one powerful enough to destroy a small warship. Lee was not alone. Ambassador Han Soman had arrived on a diplomatic transport, bringing with her a small team of experts and guards. Major Bae Sulji commanded the military escort. 12 of humanity's best soldiers armed with the latest weapons and armor. Dr. Shin Minji carried her scientific equipment, hoping to learn everything possible about the aliens. But everyone knew that if the Korthok decided to fight, weapons and armor would not matter much. The alien shuttle landed with a sound like thunder. Steam hissed from its landing systems as the massive craft settled onto the docking platform. For several minutes, nothing happened. The humans waited nervously, unsure what to expect. Then the shuttle's cargo ramp began to lower. The first figure to emerge was War Chief Grokster himself. Up close, he was even more impressive than the video transmissions had shown. 3 meters, tall and covered in natural armor plating, he moved with the deadly grace of a perfect predator. His forearms ended in clawed hands that could tear through steel. His red eyes scanned the docking bay, taking in every detail. Behind him came 4 other Korthok warriors, each one a walking nightmare that would have sent most galactic species running in terror. They wore no additional armor because their skin was already harder than most metals. They carried no visible weapons because their bodies were weapons. Ambassador Han stepped forward, showing no fear despite facing the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. She had spent her entire career dealing with hostile aliens and dangerous situations. This was just another day at work. "War Chief Grokster," she said formally. "Welcome to Mining Station Beta 7. I am Ambassador Han Soman, representing humanity in this first meeting between our species." Grokster studied the small human female for a moment. By Korthok standards, she was tiny and fragile, barely reaching his chest. But her posture and tone indicated she was a leader, someone worthy of respect. Ambassador Han Grokster replied, his voice like distant thunder. "I am honored to meet a representative of the species that conquered Earth." The word conquered surprised everyone. Most species spoke of humans as lucky survivors who had managed to leave their dangerous homeworld. But Grokster saw it differently. To him, humans had not escaped from Earth. They had defeated it. The group moved to Conference Room Alpha, the station's largest meeting space. The room had been modified to accommodate the Korthok warriors, with reinforced furniture and raised ceilings. Even so, the aliens seemed to fill the entire space with their presence. As they sat down, Ambassador Han began the formal introductions. She presented Captain Lee as a representative of humanity's exploration and defense forces. She introduced Major Bae as a military advisor and Dr. Shin as a scientific observer. Grokster introduced his own companions. Subcommander Throgak was his second in command, a veteran of hundreds of battles. Warpriest Velthresh served as both spiritual advisor and cultural expert. The other 2 warriors were honor guards, present to ensure their leader's safety. "Before we begin formal discussions," Ambassador Han said, "I must ask about your intentions regarding human territory. Your fleet's approach has caused considerable concern among our colonies." Grokster leaned back in his specially reinforced chair. The furniture creaked under his weight, but held firm. "We did not come to conquer," he said simply. "We came to understand how you survived what we could not." The humans exchanged confused glances. The Korthok were the ultimate survivors, the species that had mastered the most dangerous world in the galaxy. What could they possibly need to learn from humanity? Warpriest Velthresh spoke for the first time. His voice was quieter than Grokster's but carried the same underlying power. "Tell us about your recreational activities," he said. The request seemed so strange that Dr. Shin actually laughed before catching herself. "I'm sorry, did you ask about recreation?" "Yes, we have studied your databases. Humans engage in activities they call extreme sports. Please explain." Major Bae looked at Ambassador Han, who nodded for her to respond. This was not the direction any of them had expected the conversation to take. While Bae began slowly, Some humans enjoy challenging themselves physically. They climb mountains, jump from aircraft, dive deep underwater, race vehicles at high speeds, things like that. The Korthok warriors exchanged glances that somehow managed to convey shock despite their alien features. You do these things for pleasure, Throgak asked. Some people do. Yes, they say it makes them feel alive, and these activities are dangerous. Very dangerous. People die doing them regularly, yet humans continue to do them anyway. Yes, in fact, the more dangerous an activity is, the more some humans want to try it. There was a long silence in the room. The Korthok seemed to be processing this information in a way that went far beyond simple understanding. Finally, spoke again. On our homeworld, we fight constantly to survive. Every day brings new threats that could kill us. We thought this made us unique among galactic species. But you fight the same battles, and you choose to fight even when you do not have to. Captain Lee felt a moment of understanding. You're saying that we're similar because we both come from worlds that tried to kill us. More than similar, Velthresh said. Your species seeks out danger even when safe. You have turned survival into an art form. You have made suffering into strength. Dr. Shin pulled out her datapad and began showing the aliens information about Earth's environment. She described hurricanes that could level entire cities, earthquakes that split the ground open, volcanoes that turned day into night. She showed them pictures of Earth's predators, sharks that could bite through steel, bears that could fight multiple armed humans, snakes whose venom could kill in minutes, and humans live alongside all of these threats. Throgak asked. We don't just live alongside them, Dr. Shin replied. We study them, swim with them, photograph them up close. Some humans even keep dangerous animals as pets. The revelation seemed to stagger the Korthok warriors. Here was a species that not only survived on a death world, but actually seemed to enjoy the challenge. Major Bay decided to push the conversation further. What about your world? What makes Korthok Prime so dangerous? Grokster's expression grew thoughtful. Our planet tries to kill everything that lives on it. The ground burns with acid rain. The air is filled with poisonous gases. Creatures that hunt in packs roam everywhere. The weather can change from freezing cold to burning hot in minutes. Earthquakes happen every day. Volcanoes never stop erupting. How do you survive? We became stronger than everything that tried to kill us. We learned to hunt the hunters. We learned to breathe poison. We learned to walk on burning ground. Captain Lee nodded slowly. Earth taught us similar lessons, but we solved them differently. Where you became physically stronger, we became more adaptable. Where you developed natural armor, we developed technology and teamwork. Different solutions to the same problem. Ambassador Han observed. Exactly, Grokster agreed. Your species and mine are the only ones we know who understand that strength comes from surviving the impossible. The meeting continued for several more hours, with both sides sharing stories of their homeworlds and the challenges they faced. The humans described climbing Mount Everest, exploring the deepest ocean trenches, and racing through desert storms. The Korthok told tales of fighting acid-breathing monsters, crossing lava fields, and surviving in environments that would kill. Most species instantly died as the day went on. Something remarkable happened. The fear and suspicion that had marked the beginning of the meeting began to fade. In its place grew something neither species had expected: mutual respect. These were not conquerors meeting victims. These were warriors recognizing other warriors, survivors acknowledging fellow survivors. When the meeting finally ended, both sides had agreed to continue discussions. There would be more meetings, more exchanges of information, and perhaps even joint expeditions to explore the galaxy's most dangerous regions. As the Korthok shuttle prepared to leave, War Chief Grokster turned to Ambassador Han one final time. Your species interests us greatly, he said. We have never met beings who understood our way of life. Perhaps that's because we live the same way, Han replied. We just do it differently. Grokster nodded slowly. Yes, different methods, same spirit. This could be the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history. As the alien shuttle departed, Captain Lee watched it disappear into the darkness of space. He had come to this meeting expecting to negotiate humanity's survival. Instead, he had witnessed the birth of something entirely new. To apex predator, species had found each other, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after the first meeting at Mining Station Betaset, and something completely unexpected was happening across human space. Korthok warriors were visiting human worlds as guests, not conquerors. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the most feared species in known space began learning human customs and sharing their own culture. On the colony world of New Busan, Subcommander Throgak stood in a military training facility, watching human soldiers prepare for their daily exercises. The Korthok warrior was 3 meters tall and weighed as much as a small vehicle, but he moved with surprising grace as he observed the humans. Sergeant Yu Yemen approached the alien visitor with a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. You had been a Marine for 8 years and had seen combat on several hostile worlds. But nothing had prepared him for working alongside a Cortex subcommander. You said formally, "Would you like to observe today's training exercise?" Throgak nodded, his red eyes studying the human soldiers. They looked so small and fragile compared to Korthok warriors. Their skin was soft, their bones were thin, and they had no natural armor or claws. By all logical standards, they should have been easy prey for any serious predator. But Throgak had read the reports about human military capabilities. These seemingly weak creatures had fought wars that would have impressed even Korthok generals. They had shown courage that rivaled the bravest warriors of his species. "What is today's training?" Throgak asked. "Endurance and strength conditioning." You replied, "The soldiers will carry heavy packs for 20 kilometers across difficult terrain, then complete an obstacle course designed to test their physical limits." Throgak was curious about this. Korthak training focused on developing natural abilities that already existed. These humans seemed to be trying to push themselves beyond their biological limitations. The exercise began with 30 human soldiers strapping on backpacks loaded with equipment and supplies. Each pack weighed almost 40 kilograms, which was significant for beings who averaged only 70 kilograms of body weight. Then they began running across a landscape that included steep hills, rocky valleys, and dense forests. What amazed Throgak was not just that the humans completed this exercise, but that they seemed to enjoy the challenge. He watched soldiers encourage each other when someone fell behind. He saw them help injured comrades finish the course even when it made their own performance worse. He observed them push themselves harder when the going got tough, instead of looking for easier paths. "Why do they smile while suffering?" Throgak asked Sergeant Udot. You grinned and wiped sweat from his forehead. "Because we know it's making us stronger. Pain is temporary, but strength lasts forever." The Korthok warrior felt something he had never experienced before: envy. His people became strong because their world forced them to be strong. These humans became strong because they chose to be strong. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, Dr. Kim Woo-sung and Professor Lee Naong were having their own eye-opening experience on a Korthok world. They stood on the surface of a planet that the Korthok used for training their young warriors. Even wearing advanced environmental suits, the human scientists felt like they were standing on the surface of a hostile alien star. The temperature outside their suits was hot, enough to melt metal. The atmosphere was filled with acids that would dissolve human flesh in seconds. The ground beneath their feet was constantly shaking from underground explosions and seismic activity. Strange creatures moved in the distance, predators so dangerous that even adult Korthok warriors treated them with respect. Their guide was Velthresh, the war priest who had attended the first meeting between the species. Despite the hellish environment, Velthresh wore no protective equipment. His natural armor plating was sufficient to protect him from conditions that would kill most galactic species instantly. "This is where our children learn to become warriors," Velthresh explained as they walked across a landscape that looked like a battlefield between gods. "They are brought here at age 5 and must survive for 1 year before they can return home." Professor Lee stared through her helmet's visor at the impossible environment around them. 5-year-old children survive here for a year. "Only the strong ones," Velthresh replied matter-of-factly. "The weak ones die, which is natural and proper. Survival of the fittest is the foundation of all life." Dr. Kim was busy taking measurements. With his scientific instruments, the readings were so extreme that his equipment was having trouble processing the data. How do they find food and water in this environment? They learn to hunt the local predators and extract nutrients from them. They learn to find the few sources of clean water that exist. Most importantly, they learn that the universe does not owe them anything. Everything must be earned through strength and skill. The human scientists spent 3 days on Velkorth, studying the planet's extreme conditions and the creatures that called it home. What impressed them most was not just the physical toughness required to survive there, but the mental strength. Everything on this world was designed to break the spirit of anyone who was not absolutely determined to live. Yet somehow, young Korthok not only survived this trial but emerged from it stronger and more confident. They learned lessons about perseverance and self-reliance that stayed with them for their entire lives. "Your species produces warriors by choice," Velthresh observed as they prepared to leave the planet. "Our species produces warriors by necessity. Both methods create strong beings, but yours is more impressive because it is voluntary." The real test of the growing relationship between humans and Korthok came when a crisis threatened to destroy everything they had built together. A rogue asteroid, pushed off course by a stellar explosion, was heading directly toward the civilian space station, Haven Point. The station housed over 50,000 people from various species, including families, children, and elderly residents, who could not be evacuated in time. The asteroid was massive, over 10 kilometers across, and moving at tremendous speed. Normal defensive measures would not be sufficient to stop or deflect it. The station's shields could not withstand an impact of that magnitude. Evacuation ships could not carry everyone to safety before the collision occurred. Captain Lee, now promoted to Admiral, received the emergency call while commanding a joint human-Korthok task force in the nearby sector. His ship, the Sole Defender, was accompanied by 3 Korthok heavy cruisers under the command of War Chief Grokster. Admiral, reported his communications officer, Haven Point is requesting immediate assistance. Impact is estimated in 6 hours. Lee studied the tactical display showing the approaching asteroid and the helpless space station. By all conventional calculations, there was no way to save the people on Haven Point. The asteroid was too big, moving too fast, and there was not enough time to mount a proper defense. But then he looked at his Korthok allies and realized that conventional solutions were not the only options available. Open a channel to War Chief Grokster, Lee ordered. The main screen activated, showing the familiar form of the Korthok leader on the bridge of his flagship. Admiral Lee, we have received the distress signal. What are your orders? We're going to save those people, Lee said simply. How? The asteroid is too large for our weapons to destroy completely. We're not going to destroy it, Lee replied. We're going to move it. What followed was a rescue operation that became legendary throughout the galaxy. Human ships used their advanced targeting systems and precise calculations to identify the exact points where controlled explosions could alter the asteroid's trajectory. Korthok vessels, with their incredibly powerful engines and nearly indestructible hulls, physically pushed against the massive rock while human explosives redirected its path. The operation required perfect coordination between 2 very different approaches to problem solving. Humans provided the scientific precision and technological solutions. Korthok provided the raw physical power and the courage to attempt something that most species would consider impossible. For 4 hours, ships from both species worked together in perfect harmony. Human engineers calculated trajectory changes down to the millimeter. Korthok pilots flew their ships into positions that would have terrified most space. Together, they accomplished something that neither species could have achieved alone. When the asteroid finally passed safely by Haven Point, missing the station by a comfortable margin, the celebration could be heard across subspace communication channels. 50,000 lives had been saved through the combined efforts of 2 species that had once been strangers. Admiral Lee stood on his bridge, watching the successful conclusion of the rescue operation. War Chief Grokster appeared on the communication screen, and for the first time since they had met, the Korthok leader was smiling. Admiral Grokster said, I believe our species work well together. I think you're right, Lee replied. This is just the beginning. The rescue at Haven Point marked a turning point in galactic history. 2 apex predator species had proven they could cooperate to protect the innocent and achieve the impossible. Word of their success spread throughout known space, changing how other civilizations viewed both humans and Korthok. More importantly, it proved to both species that they were stronger together than they were apart. 1 year after the rescue at Haven Point, the most important ceremony in galactic history was about to take place. The human dreadnought floated majestically in space, its massive hull gleaming under the light of 3 different stars. Around it, ships from dozens of species had gathered to witness something unprecedented. The formal alliance between humanity and the Korthok Empire. Admiral Lee Minho stood on the observation deck of his flagship, watching the assembled fleet. Through the reinforced windows, human warships flew in formation alongside Korthok battlecruisers, their crews working together as if they had been allies for decades rather than months. The sight still amazed him every time he saw it. Admiral, the ceremony is ready to begin, announced Captain Park Yuna, who now served as his chief of staff. Lee nodded and made his way to the main conference hall, where representatives from both species had gathered for the historic signing. The room had been specially modified to accommodate both human and Korthok dignitaries, with reinforced furniture and environmental controls that could handle the needs of both species. At the center of the room stood a table made from metal, taken from both Earth and Korthok Prime. On that table lay the treaty that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. President Kong Daeho had traveled from Earth specifically for this occasion. He was a tall, dignified man who had led humanity through some of its most challenging years as a spacefaring civilization. Beside him stood Ambassador Han Saman, who had become the leading expert on human-Korthok relations. On the other side of the table waited High Commander Mor, the supreme leader of the Korthok Empire. He was even larger than War Chief Grokster, standing nearly 4 meters tall and covered in ceremonial armor that had been passed down through generations of Korthok rulers. His presence filled the room with an aura of barely contained power. War Chief Grokster, now holding the title of Alliance Marshal, stood beside his supreme leader. The past year had changed him in subtle ways. Working closely with humans had taught him that strength could take many forms, and that the greatest victories sometimes came through cooperation rather than conquest. This treaty represents more than a military alliance, President Kang began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's communication systems. It represents a recognition of kinship between 2 species who understand that strength is earned, not given. High Commander Morthax nodded his massive head. The humans have proven themselves worthy allies through deed, not just words. They have shown courage that rivals our greatest warriors and wisdom that exceeds our expectations. The formal signing took place with representatives from both governments adding their names to the historic document. But the real significance of the moment came when Admiral Lee and Marshal Grokster shook hands, symbolizing the bond between two military leaders who had learned to trust each other completely. As the ceremony concluded, the assembled fleet began joint maneuvers that demonstrated the new alliance's capabilities. Human ships provided long-range sensors and precision targeting, while Korthok vessels delivered overwhelming firepower and nearly indestructible defensive capabilities. Together, they formed a combined force that was greater than the sum of its parts. The galaxy watched these exercises with a mixture of awe and fear. The two most dangerous species in known space were now working together, and their combined might was something that no single civilization could hope to match. But the real test of the alliance was yet to come. 3 months after the signing ceremony, scouts reported massive fleet movements in the Zephyrian Empire, a powerful civilization that had been enemies of the Korthok for over a century. The Zephyrians had watched the human-Korthok alliance form with growing alarm, and now they were preparing to strike before it could grow any stronger. The Zephyrian plan was simple and brutal. They would attack the human colony world of New Daegu, expecting to find a soft target defended only by primitive human forces. Once they had conquered a human world, they believed the alliance would collapse as the Korthok abandoned their weak allies to save themselves. It was a reasonable plan based on everything the galaxy knew about how alliances worked. Throughout galactic history, partnerships between strong and weak species had always ended the same way. When real danger threatened, the strong abandoned the weak to save themselves. But the Zephyrians had made one critical error in their calculations. They had assumed that humans were the weak partner in the alliance. General Oteon received the warning about the approaching Zephyrian fleet while inspecting the defenses of New Daegu. The planet was one of humanity's newer colonies, established on a world that most species would consider barely habitable. The gravity was heavy, the weather was violent, and the local ecosystem was filled with predators that would have been considered dangerous on most civilized worlds. In other words, it was exactly the kind of place where humans felt at home. General, long-range sensors show a Zephyrian battle fleet approaching our system, reported Colonel Beek Sung-ho, the planet's defense coordinator. 300 ships, including at least 50 heavy cruisers. O studied the tactical displays, showing the enemy approach. The Zephyrian Empire had one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy, with ships that mounted weapons capable of turning entire continents into glass. They had conquered dozens of worlds and had never suffered a significant defeat. What's our defensive capability? O asked. 12 human frigates, 6 orbital defense platforms, and about 30,000 ground troops, Beek replied. We've also got the planetary defense grid, but it's designed more for asteroid defense than major fleet actions. By any reasonable calculation, New Daegu was doomed. The approaching Zephyrian fleet outnumbered the human defenders by more than 20 to 1. Their ships were larger, more heavily armed, and crewed by beings who had been conquering worlds since before humanity had left Earth. But General O was not worried about reasonable calculations. Colonel, activate protocol. Hellworld, he ordered. Beek's eyes widened. Sir, are you sure? That protocol has never been tested in actual combat. The Zephyrians want to see what happens when they attack a human world, O replied grimly. Let's show them. Protocol Hellworld was a defensive strategy that had been developed specifically for human colonies, established on dangerous worlds. Instead of trying to fight the environment, the protocol turned the planet itself into a weapon against invaders. New Daegu's weather control systems, originally designed to protect the colony from natural storms, were modified to create the most violent atmospheric conditions possible. Seismic charges were planted at key points to trigger controlled earthquakes. The local predator population, normally kept away from human settlements, was deliberately released into areas where enemy forces were expected to land. But most importantly, General O sent an emergency transmission to the nearest Korthok fleet, requesting immediate assistance under the terms of the new alliance. Marshal Grokster received the message while his task force was conducting training exercises in a nearby system. The request was simple. New Daegu was under attack and needed help for a Korthok warrior. There was only one possible response. Set course for New Daegu. Maximum speed, Grokster ordered his fleet commanders. Battle stations for all ships. The Zephyrian invasion force arrived at New Daegu expecting to find a terrified human colony ready to surrender. Instead, they found a planet that had been turned into a massive trap designed to kill anyone foolish enough to land on its surface. The first wave of Zephyrian landing craft encountered atmospheric storms, so violent that half of them crashed. Before reaching the ground, the survivors found themselves fighting not just human defenders, but the planet itself. Earthquakes opened massive cracks in the ground beneath their feet. Predatory animals that had evolved to hunt in one of the galaxy's most dangerous ecosystems stalked them through forests that had been turned into killing fields. The human defenders, equipped with environmental suits and years of experience living on hostile worlds, moved through the chaos like they were walking through a pleasant garden. They struck at enemy forces with precision and ruthlessness, then disappeared into environments that the Zephyrians could barely survive in. The battle raged for 6 hours. Before the Korthok reinforcements arrived, Marshal Grokster's S-fleet emerged from hyperspace and immediately engaged the Zephyrian ships in orbit. The space battle was brief but decisive, with Korthok firepower overwhelming the enemy fleet's defenses. But the real lesson of the Battle of New Daegu was learned on the planet's surface, where Zephyrian ground forces found themselves facing an enemy unlike anything they had ever encountered. Humans fighting on a world they had made their home were not the weak, civilized beings the Zephyrians had expected. They were apex predators defending their territory, and they fought with a ferocity that impressed even their Korthok allies. When the battle finally ended, the Zephyrian invasion force had been completely destroyed. Not a single enemy soldier escaped from New Daegu's surface. The orbital fleet was either destroyed or captured, with only a few ships managing to flee back to Zephyrian space. The aftermath of the battle sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The Zephyrian Empire, one of the most powerful civilizations in known space, had been decisively defeated by what they had assumed was the weaker partner. In the Human Korthok Alliance, General O stood in his command center, reviewing the battle reports with Marshal Grokster, who had personally overseen the final stages of the ground combat. "Your species continues to surprise us," the Korthok leader observed. "We expected to find humans who needed rescue. Instead, we found warriors who had already won their battle. We learned a long time ago that there's no such thing as a fair fight." O replied. "You use every advantage you have, including the ground you're fighting on. A lesson our species should have learned long ago," Grokster admitted. "Perhaps, working with humans will teach us new ways to be strong." The Battle of New Daegu marked the end of the Zephyrian threat and the beginning of a new era in galactic politics. The Human Korthok Alliance had proven itself through combat, demonstrating that it was not a partnership between strong and weak, but an alliance between two different kinds of strength. More importantly, it showed the galaxy that the age of traditional power structures was coming to an end. The future belonged to those who could adapt, survive, and overcome impossible odds. And in that new future, humans and Korthok would lead the way together. 5 years had passed since the first meeting between humans and Korthok at mining station Beta Van. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The old order, dominated by ancient civilizations and traditional power structures, was giving way to something entirely new. Fleet Admiral Lee Minho stood on the observation deck of Harmony Station, the massive joint command facility that orbited the neutral world of Kepler Prime. Through the reinforced windows, he could see a sight that still amazed him every day: human and Korthok children playing together in the station's recreational areas. The children were participating in training exercises that would have terrified most adult beings from other species. Human kids and young Korthok climbed artificial mountains, swam through obstacle courses designed to simulate hostile environments, and competed in contests of strength and endurance that pushed them to their limits. But they were not just training, they were having fun. "It's remarkable how quickly they adapt," observed Dr. Shin Meingi, who had been promoted to Director of Interspecies Relations. She stood beside Admiral Lee, watching a group of 10-year-old humans teaching young Korthok how to use human-designed climbing equipment. "Children don't have the same prejudices as adults," Lee replied. "They see differences as interesting rather than threatening." The scene below them represented the future of the Human Korthok Alliance. These children were growing up together, learning from each other, and developing bonds that would last their entire lives. When they became adults, they would take leadership roles in a galaxy where cooperation between Deathworld species was normal rather than extraordinary. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Admiral Lee activated his personal communicator and saw the familiar face of Ambassador Han Soman appearing on the small screen. "Admiral, we have a situation developing in the Outer Rim," Han reported. "The Galactic Council is requesting our assistance with what they're calling a diplomatic crisis." Lee frowned. Relations between the Alliance and the Galactic Council had been complicated since the Human Korthok partnership began. Many Council species still viewed the Alliance with suspicion and fear, uncomfortable with the idea that two Deathworld species were now the dominant military force in known space. What kind of crisis? First contact with a new species. The Council's initial diplomatic mission was a complete failure, and now they're asking for our help. What went wrong with their mission? Han's expression showed a mixture of amusement and frustration. The new species lives on a world that makes Earth and Korthok Prime look like vacation resorts. The Council's diplomatic team couldn't even survive long enough to establish communication. Lee understood immediately. This was exactly the kind of situation where the Alliance's unique capabilities would be essential. Species from gentle worlds simply could not function in environments that Deathworld natives found comfortable. "We'll take the mission," Lee decided. assemble a joint diplomatic team, and prepare the exploration fleet. 3 days later, the Alliance Expeditionary Force arrived at the edge of the Zarian system, where the newly discovered species had been detected. The system was a nightmare of gravitational anomalies, radiation fields, and spatial distortions that would have destroyed most civilian vessels. The flagship of the expedition was the Terra Nova, a joint human-Korthok vessel that incorporated the best technology from both species. Admiral Lee commanded the overall mission, while Marshal Grokster led the military escort. The diplomatic team included representatives from both species, along with scientists and cultural experts who had spent years studying Deathworld environments. They approached the fourth planet in the system. The extent of the challenge became clear. Zarian 4 was a world caught between 3 different stars, with surface conditions that changed constantly as the planet's complex orbit carried it. Through multiple gravitational fields, temperatures ranged from absolute zero to hot enough to melt most metals. The atmosphere was a mixture of corrosive gases that would dissolve standard environmental suits in minutes. Council records show that their diplomatic team lasted exactly 17 minutes on the surface, reported Dr. Kim Woo-sung, who now served as the Alliance's chief xenobiologist. Their environmental suits failed. Their communications equipment was destroyed by radiation, and their landing craft was torn apart by gravitational shears. What do we know about the native species? Marshal Grokster asked. Very little. Long-range sensors detected artificial structures and energy signatures consistent with advanced technology, but we have no information about their biology, culture, or intentions. Admiral Lee studied the tactical displays showing the planet's hostile environment. For most species, attempting to land on Zarian 4 would be suicide, but humans and Korthok had spent their entire evolutionary history dealing with impossible environments. We'll establish first contact the same way we always do, Lee decided. We'll adapt to their world instead of expecting them to adapt to ours. The landing party consisted of 6 humans and 6 Korthok, all wearing advanced environmental suits designed specifically for extreme conditions. The humans brought their technological expertise and adaptability. The Korthok contributed their physical resilience and ability to function in hostile environments. The team landed on Zarian 4 during what the planet's inhabitants apparently considered a calm period. The surface temperature was only hot enough to melt lead. The atmosphere was only mildly corrosive, and the gravitational field was relatively stable. Within minutes of landing, they made contact with the native species. The Zarians were unlike anything either humans or Korthok had encountered before. They appeared to be living crystals, beings made of some kind of mineral compound that could reshape itself at will. They moved through their world's hellish environment as easily as humans walked through air, seemingly unaffected by conditions that would destroy most known forms of life. The first meeting took place in a crystalline structure that served as some kind of communication center. The Zarians communicated through vibrations in the planet's crust, a form of speech that required specialized equipment to translate. Welcome, survivors, the lead Zarian said, through the translation system. We greet you as fellow children of impossible worlds. Admiral Lee felt a familiar sense of recognition. Once again, they had encountered a species that understood the fundamental truth that strength came from surviving the impossible. We come in peace, Lee replied. Our species seek to learn from yours and to offer friendship between survivors. Are the first visitors who have not died within moments of arriving, the Zarian observed. Your ability to adapt to our world suggests that you, like us, were forged by environments that should have killed you. Marshal Grokster stepped forward, his massive form somehow seeming appropriate in this alien environment. We represent an alliance between 2 Deathworld species. We understand what it means to earn your place in the universe through struggle. The conversation that followed lasted for several hours, with both sides sharing stories of their homeworlds and the challenges they had overcome. The Zarians spoke of temperatures that could freeze solid rock, radiation levels that would sterilize most planets, and gravitational forces that could tear apart molecular bonds. Yet their species had not just survived, but had developed a sophisticated civilization and advanced technology. When the meeting finally concluded, the Zarians had agreed to establish formal diplomatic relations with the Alliance. They were interested in learning about other Deathworld species and curious about how different environments had shaped different evolutionary paths. The successful first contact with the Zarians marked another milestone in the Alliance's growing influence. Word of the mission spread throughout the galaxy, reinforcing the idea that humans and Korthok were uniquely qualified to deal with the most challenging situations in known space. But the real significance of the Zarian mission became clear 6 months later, when 3 more Deathworld species requested contact with the Alliance. The galaxy's most dangerous worlds, previously thought to be uninhabitable, were revealing themselves to be home to civilizations that had been waiting for someone who could understand their way of life. Admiral Lee stood once again on Harmony Station's observation deck, but now he was watching a very different scene. Representatives from 6 different Deathworld species were meeting in the station's main conference hall. discussing the formation of what some were calling the Survival Alliance. Each species brought unique strengths to the partnership. Humans contributed adaptability and technological innovation. Korthok provided raw physical power and military expertise. The Xerians offered advanced knowledge of energy manipulation and crystalline technology. The newest members brought their own specialized abilities. From the Glacian's mastery of extreme cold environments to the Pyrethan's ability to thrive in the hearts of active volcanoes. The Galactic Council is worried, Ambassador Han reported, as she joined Admiral Lee at the observation window. They're calling it the rise of a Deathworld coalition. Are they threatening us? Not directly, but they're making it clear that they view our expansion as a threat to galactic stability. Lee nodded thoughtfully. The old order had been based on the idea that civilized species avoided danger and sought comfort and safety. The rise of the Deathworld Alliance challenged that fundamental assumption, suggesting that true strength came from embracing challenge rather than avoiding it. What about individual species? Are any of them interested in joining us? More than you might expect, Han replied with a smile. It turns out that a lot of species have been tired of the Council's policies for a long time. They're impressed by what we've accomplished and want to be part of something that rewards merit rather than just political connections. The future of the galaxy was taking shape around them. The old system, dominated by ancient civilizations that had grown soft from centuries of comfort, was giving way to a new order based on strength, adaptability, and the willingness to face impossible challenges. In the conference hall below, the representatives of 6 Deathworld species were drafting the charter for their expanded alliance. The document they were creating would establish new principles for galactic civilization. That strength was earned through struggle, that comfort bred weakness, and that the future belonged to those who could adapt and overcome. Dr. Shin Mingi approached Admiral Lee with a datapad showing the latest reports from across the galaxy. Admiral, we've received requests for alliance membership from over 40 different species. Most of them are from worlds that other civilizations consider too dangerous for colonization. The galaxy is full of survivors, Lee observed. They've just been waiting for someone to show them that survival is something to be proud of rather than ashamed of. As he spoke, a group of young Alliance citizens ran past the observation window, heading for their next training session. Human, Korthok, Xerian, and other species children played together, learning from each other and preparing for a future where the impossible was just another challenge to overcome. The galaxy had learned a fundamental truth that would shape its future for generations to come. When Deathworld species finally found each other, they did not compete or fight. They recognized the kinship forged in the crucible of impossible survival, and together, they became something greater than any of them could have achieved alone. The age of comfort was ending. The age of earned strength had begun. And at its heart stood the alliance between humanity and the Korthok, 2 species, who had looked at impossible worlds and decided to call them home.